Yes.
And we are recording this on the eve of you being able to give Jordan Peele his very cool award at the
Best Screenplay.
Yeah.
Or Get Out.
Yeah.
A really, really good movie. Number one.
Good movie, but here's what I love about Get Out in particular. What I love about it is that it takes a genre that normally is not taken seriously. You know, it's a horror film genre. It's the Stepford Wives. It's body snatching, body switching stuff. It's mad scientist kind of stuff. But it uses that as a vehicle for ideas that would normally wind up in a much more highbrow movie that would never hit its intended audience.
It's intended because he understands that these jokes, these concepts, have to speak to these two different audiences. Yeah. These moments are going to hit these audiences different ways.
Yeah,
and he figured that out. So can't wait to give Jordan Peele, the Los Angeles Film Critics Association, awarded him Best Screenplay.
Yep.
I wrote a little speech. Going to give it to him. I'm going to talk it up. Got to tell you, couldn't be happier that the brother is going to be giving the brother an award. It's kind of fun for me. Anyway.
Oh, it'll be neat to meet him. What a talent he is. Well, let's dive in. We got a lot of stuff that was kind of left over from last week. So let's jump right in. On the doc front, I want to make quick mention of a couple of things because it just never leaves the news cycle. So we've got two here. We've got Trump, the art of the insult, and Trumping democracy, real money, fake news, your data. These are flip sides of the current political situation. So the Trump, the art of the insult, is a lot more serious than it looks. It looks like it's some kind of hokey thing. Actually, it's not. It is a look at Trump's rise politically and in business, but particularly during the presidential campaign, about how he uses insults, particularly funny insults, demeaning insults, as a political tool. It's actually quite interesting. It's maybe not as deep and probing as it could be or as it should be, which is weird because it's an hour and a half long. But it's very well documented, and I thought it was in many respects very persuasive. Trumping democracy is from the people at Cinema Libre. And Cinema Libre is a progressive-leaning DVD company, primarily progressive causes, so you know exactly the angle this is coming from. They are horrified by the Trump presidency, and this is entirely about trying to connect the dots in certain things, which, to be honest, it's already obsolete because Bannon factors into this, and I guess
the new book,
the new book and all that stuff.
Recent book, anyway.
But nonetheless, if you're a big anti-Trumper and you're still wrestling with your feelings, and the year hasn't made it any easier, Trumping democracy might go a little bit into helping you through your crises.
Do you want to take a look at this gigantic? Or are you going to move on?
Let's segue to that after the PBS stuff. I want to, we've had some PBS stuff that also accumulated over the holiday, and this is all really good. I'll make this as quick as possible. Great collection of PBS titles here. Eclipse Over America from Nova. Deals with the recent August 21st eclipse, which you saw it in St. Louis.
Saw it in St. Louis because, as it happens, we were right in the path of totality.
That's fantastic.
I saw both that eclipse and the one before it, some 30-odd years before it, as a teenager.
Wow.
I saw them both from my mother's backyard.
No kidding.
As a teenager in St. Louis, total totality right across St. Louis. I was in my mom's backyard this time I guess it was last year, August 20th, in my mom's backyard. Total totality with my little brother. And you know where I'm going to be when the next one comes?
Where?
In my mom's backyard. Because it's going to crisscross across the country in the other direction. But again, St. Louis will be in the path of totality.
Great.
And I was talking to my mom about that. I was telling Mom, in another I think it's like 17 years or something before the next one comes. Mom, it's going to come through. It's going to be right through your backyard again. She's like, well, I'll be here, sweetie. So y'all can come on by.
Awesome. So another really good PBS documentary narrated by Hugh Bonneville of Downton Abbey, and also the new and ongoing, and hopefully will be around a long time, Paddington series, which my daughter absolutely adores. So this is Martin Luther, The Idea That Changed the World. I was a history major before I was a film major at UCLA for about a year and a half or so. And as a history major, I studied, among many other things, European religious history and Martin Luther and the Reformation in particular. Read a lot of Martin Luther. Fascinating guy. And really, really fascinating. And this is a very, very good doc that deals with the role that Martin Luther played in sort of changing the course of history, not just from a religious point of view, not just for Christians, but in terms of so many other ways, the ways that the laws in Europe have changed, the cultural changes in Europe, the things that divide Eastern Europe from Western Europe and Northern Europe from Southern Europe, all of these things factor into this. And, people don't realize Martin Luther really didn't plan to invent a new branch of Christianity.
No, he wanted to reform.
That was it. He wanted to reform the Catholic Church, but what was missed at the time was that there were a lot of forces within the Roman Empire, especially German peasants, who felt they were getting the short end of the stick. And this was a great way to sort of piggyback your political concerns onto a religious schism. It's all fascinating stuff.
The schism was not the intention. It was the result.
It was the result.
Yeah.
Mindfulness Goes Mainstream Techniques. This is a 3-disc set. It's a little, new agey for my taste, but it's all about sort of meditation and mindfulness and how to focus your mental health and your overall wellness and all that kind of stuff. It's a little kind of new agey yoga-y, but without sort of necessarily being faithful to all of those ideas, all of those Eastern ideas that inform it. But nonetheless, it's interesting. It's maybe not 3 discs interesting, but it's interesting. So that is Mindfulness Goes Mainstream Techniques, and I'm sure there will be more to that. Excuse me. We've got 3 from the Nature series here. Naledi, One Little Elephant.
Oh, about that baby elephant.
Oh, it's the sweetest thing in the world. So sweet. Baby elephants are just the best thing ever. That little fuzz on them. Anyway. This is about that orphan elephant, and it's a really, really wonderful story. It's really, really, really sweet and heartwarming, and I can't say a bad thing about it. H is for Hawk, a new chapter. This is based on the best-selling book by Helen MacDonald, which is a story of a daughter, a grieving daughter who adopted a hawk, basically. And it's very, very sweet. It's worth checking out. It's hawks are not exactly the kindest things to, but like I wouldn't recommend anybody get a hawk for a pet.
No.
But nonetheless, it's very, very good. And then Charlie and the Curious Otters with Charlie Hamilton James, who is a wildlife filmmaker and conservationist. I just like this because I like otters. I just think otters are funny. I don't have any great sort of ecological attachment to them or anything. I just think they're funny, and they make me laugh. So give me as much otter footage as you can. Underwater, above water, cuddling, eating things, eating raw fish. I don't care. It's funny. And then a couple of very, very topical Frontline docs. I don't know what they do at Frontline. These people are amazing. They turn these things around in a heartbeat, and they're always really, really, really good. Mosul this is actually a 2-movie set. It includes the documentary Mosul, which is the main thing on here, and then there's also Inside Yemen. Pretty amazing. The battle to drive ISIS out of Mosul, and then Inside Yemen, which is looking at the humanitarian crisis of the war inside Yemen, which is fronted both by Saudi Arabia and Iran. It's a proxy war. Very, very good. And then much more timely, considering that we have recently had tweets about buttons, North Korea's Deadly Dictator. This is a Frontline documentary about the guy with the little button, as opposed to our guy with the big button that we talked about earlier in the show. So this begins essentially with the what would we call it, fratricide of Kim Jong-un's brother. Yeah. And takes a very, very penetrating look at him and his background, his upbringing, talks to people who knew him. And I emerged from this thinking, this guy's nuts. I mean, he's crazy like a fox, but he's still nuts. Yeah. So that family has mental illness in it somewhere. Anyway, anything that deals with North Korea is fascinating to me.
Absolutely, and a little, I mean, he went to school, if I'm not
Switzerland.
in Switzerland.
Yeah.
And so for whatever reason, I knew that from years ago.
Yeah.
When I was, and I had always thought that something about that alone.
Yeah.
Because that's what they'll do. They'll secret these sort of destined children off to places to get their education. And I always think, well, there's no way you can go to school in Switzerland or in the United States, for that matter, spend your formative years here.
Yeah.
And then not go back to, whatever nutty country you came from. What's it, Hafez al-Assad's son, who rules Syria now.
Yeah.
Who was an optometrist and went to Harvard or Yale maybe or whatever, But nevertheless, there's something about the nature of where they're from, no matter where they were, that insinuates itself back in. And the crazy's right there. I have to know that both of them know better.
Yeah, you would think.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I know Hafez al-Assad's son. I figure it was Bashir.
Bashir, yeah.
Yeah, I know he knows better.
Of course he does.
But nevertheless, you know what? I get to run the country. I become Ming the Merciless. That's
there you go.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Shall I knock out the?
Let's talk about this. We got Criterion.
What a box!
Criterion, man, this is maybe the gnarliest thing Criterion has ever released.
The physical box itself is, it's as big as a masonry brick one used to build a house. 100 years of Olympic films, 1912 to 2012.
Yeah.
Is the period that it covers, which covers some 40-plus Olympiads and some 50-odd films, 53 movies, and 41 editions of the Olympic Games themselves. The Winter Games are coming up here soon. Look, we hear from all of the filmmakers that you would imagine that you would hear from in this box set. It's from Criterion.
It would take a whole separate show to get into this. This is a cinder block.
Yeah,
is what this is.
Cinder block. Yeah,
and if you love the Olympics, you're going to love this. If you just love really good sports documentary filmmaking, you're still going to love this.
This is like 30 for 30 times 1,000. And all of the Jesse Owens and all this sort of classic stuff.
It's unbelievable.
Lenny Riefenstahl. But you hear from Claude Lelouch, you hear from Milos Forman, you hear from all of these people.
It's amazing. It really is amazing. I mean, it would take you months to just dig through even a fraction of this thing. So it's I don't know if I can recommend this to everybody, because this is quite an investment. You really have to love sports and love the Olympics and love documentary filmmaking, but Criterion has really just killed it with this. I mean, this is really one of their elite releases, and they did a great job. I mean, they did a really, really good job.
Nearly $400 retail. It can be had for $225, $250, whatever. But
it's a commitment. But here's the other thing too: is that there are only about 40-some people that work at Criterion, and these people all pull their weight. They just kill it every single time out, and this is a passion project. This is a real work of love, and you just have to tip your hat to them and just say, you guys restored these things, you curated them, you put them together, you packed it all up in a big box, and you put a big price tag on it, and you didn't care, because somebody is going to love this and they're going to buy it, and good for you. That's the way a company should be run.
And what's lovely is it's many of those will end up in the collections of places like UCLA.
Absolutely,
and blah, blah, blah,
absolutely. This is a service to humanity. This is a historical endeavor.
Yeah,
and I'm thrilled that they did it. It's great.
Into what now?
Well, let's get into the other Criterions,
including Young Mr. Lincoln. Probably, I don't know, among my favorite Abraham, fictionalized version, obviously. Of the Young Life of Abraham Lincoln, directed by John Ford. But it's among my favorite. I mean, you go from this to that Spielberg film.
Yeah, and what I do love is that this is not a just big old grand cradle of the grave biopic like the Spielberg film. It understands Lincoln led a very large and vast life, and if you really want to do justice to the man, you've got to pick a moment, bookend some piece of his life, and this is great. That's what this. That's
because
what makes
there's really
good.
Aren't any moments in Abraham Lincoln's life where he is not, even as a child, as a young lawyer. As a young congressman, where he's not actually engaged in something rather extraordinary. Generally speaking, this is packed with all kinds of stuff. By the way, 1939 film, black and white, and it's an excellent film. Lots and lots and lots of extras.
And then we get The Breakfast Club, and lots of extras here. The Breakfast Club is an unusual film to wind up on Criterion. I don't think anybody expected that because there's been so many releases of the John Hughes films. And I think everyone just kind of felt like, well, that's, maybe this means we're going to get Ferris. Maybe it means 16 Candles. I hope this means that there have been discussions with Universal that we're going to put all the John Hughes films, of that Pretty in Pink. We're gonna release them all eventually, and that would be great for them to all get Criterion releases, especially Ferris. I'd love a Criterion Ferris. Tons of, Breakfast Club is a really seminal film. We talked about this last week on Film Week.
Yeah,
and it is. It's really the film of a generation for a lot of people.
Celebrating an anniversary, right?
Yeah,
25 years.
It was made in 1985, so we're
plus.
We're 30 years on, right?
Yeah,
20. Yeah. Anyway, really, really good film still. One of the smartest films that John Hughes wrote, and very contained, right? It's a bunch of kids in a room, basically. But it's good. And lots of extras on here, including a new video essay with his original production notes that are recited by Judd Nelson, a 2008 documentary, and then nearly an hour of deleted and extended scenes, which is amazing. Never seen before. Really, really great for fans. And then 1985 NBC Today Show segment with the cast. It's just so good. The Breakfast Club, one of John
That movie
Hughes'
made
best.
a lot of movie stars.
It did. Didn't
Some
it?
of those kids had been around before. Molly Ringwald had been
But
on
it-
Facts of Life as a little kid.
Yep.
But it made
just
them movie stars
them up to
for
the
a
next
while,
level.
anyway.
Yeah.
They were movie stars. Michael Haneke's The Piano Teacher. Just an absolutely extraordinary film about a certain kind of sexual perversity, control,
As
and power.
only Haneke could do.
Yeah.
I
And
remember.
Isabelle Huppert,
I remember seeing this with my wife. And it was not my wife at the time, but we were both. We walked out with the same feeling, which was that is an unbelievably good and well-crafted movie, and I just didn't need that in my head.
Don't ever need to see it again. Although some people will, but Michael Haneke, so
Yeah.
the piano, white material. I mean, we can, we can.
White Ribbon.
Right,
Yeah.
ribbon. That's really what I meant. 2001 film. This is anyway a lovely Criterion collection edition, director approved Blu-ray special edition with all kinds of special features on it.
I, Daniel Blake, Criterion release of the 2016 winner of the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. This was Ken Loach's second Palme d'Or, and a lot of people felt that this was not the deserving film, that it should have gone to any number of other films because this is very sort of boilerplate Ken Loach. But here's the thing. The first Ken Loach film that was given the Palme d'Or was The Wind That Shakes the Barley, which is a period film, historical film dealing with the conflict in Northern Ireland and in Irish independence and all of that stuff, and is fact-based. It's not really a pure Ken Loach film. If you wanted to reward Ken Loach for the kinds of movies on which he has based his career, which are very documentary-like, cinema verite-like movies about contemporary working class people facing struggles and these very sort of anti-Thatcher sort of very left-wing polemics, then you get into a film like I, Daniel Blake, which is a horrific tour of the system and how it fails to serve an unemployed guy, a guy who's now been injured and needs to be on workers' comp, and what the bureaucratic quagmire that he gets stuck in is having to fill this out, and then there's these catch-22s that we can't give you the money unless you do this, and you can't do this unless you get the money, and how am I supposed to dig myself? Well, that's the system, and the system is just a monster. And it really is, it's interesting that Ken Loach is a guy who really believes in the welfare state, but this is kind of an indictment of its current incarnation, its formulation. So it's not really as polemical as I think some people might think. It really is, it's provocative.
It's a movie by yes, he's a socialist, but he's a humanitarian socialist.
Yeah.
What he's really talking about is the human condition here, the system, even this quasi-socialist system, or no, not quasi-socialist, it's a socialist system. is still failing because it's not seeing the freaking human.
Yeah.
This will fail whether you're a communist or whether you're a socialist.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any difference. Or whether you're a capitalist. It doesn't make any difference.
It's the bureaucracy.
Humans have to be able. A good friend of ours, Sherman Augustus, is in a Ken Loach film called Bread and Roses.
Yeah.
Sherman is in that movie. Interestingly, I, Daniel Blake and I, Tanya, the same movie.
It kind of is. Yeah. Good point.
End of the day, same movie. I grabbed Matinee over here just because this is a 1993 film that I happen to have done the junket for. It's a Joe Dante film.
That's so
I did the junket for the John
so
Goodman
much fun.
film. It was just the neatest film, and more or less about it's a film set in the 50s about an old Hollywood producer who would produce those kind of wacky films where they would have the stingers in the chairs and all that kind of stuff. And it's just a funny film. That loosely refers to the kind of films that Joe Dante grew up watching, and it's sweet and it's neat. This is full of all kinds of neat stuff, including a interview with director Joe Dante. I happen to have interviewed Joe Dante a couple of years ago, I guess, for a film that he made that happened to have been maybe the second to last film of young Anton Yelchin. That he made. It was just anything. Anyway, Matinee Collector's Edition, good movie from Shout Factory, full of all kinds of special features. Give it a check out. If you would.
And then also from Shout, from the Shout Select line, is a new Blu-ray of Macon County Line. Sheriff Reed Morgan. Macon County Line, really a fascinating kind of a cult film from 1974. I think this is, here's the thing. The early 70s, the late 60s and the early 70s were filled with all kinds of sort of neo-modern westerns, right? Mm-hmm. Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry.
Walking Tall.
Macon County Line. We could even put Badlands in there, right? These are all predicated on the same idea, which came out of the 60s and in the early 70s, which is this idea that the West is still with us, that there is still an outlaw part of the country, and it's lawless, and it sort of breeds a sort of, and you could even argue that Bonnie and Clyde maybe sort of instigated Billy Jack, right? Yeah. They all belong to that sort of genre, which is interesting because that, I think, is an outgrowth also of war protests in Vietnam and this sort of sense that maybe we haven't really grown up as a country. And so you're looking at the country again through the lens of, what it was 100 years earlier and have we really changed? And Macon County Line is very, Walking Tall, we said, is very much a part of that. Yeah. Macon County Line is definitely a part of that. And... you can look at it as part of the juvenile delinquent exploitation genre as well. He's a tough sheriff, and he will not have kids have their way. But it's much more than that, and it has lingered because of that. And it is pretty sharp. And the best thing about it is that it's Max Baer who plays Reed Morgan.
Jethro Bodine.
Man, this is this switch on a dime. He was so goofy as Jethro on Beverly Hillbillies, and here he just flips a switch, and man, he is just...
What's funny is, turns out, Jethro could act.
He could. Yeah. Boy, could he ever. So a lot of great features on here. The editor and director Richard Compton both do commentaries. There's a vintage featurette and a trailer. It's good stuff.
Yes. Some of these?
Yeah, let's plow through. You know what? Here, let's do the Warner Archive stuff.
The Warner Archive stuff. I think this was left over from last week, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
The one I'll start here from the Warner Archives: Kathy Bates and Jennifer Jason Leigh and Taylor Hackford's Dolores Claiborne. Yeah, which was an adaptation of a Stephen King novel.
I actually really like this film.
It's
I really do.
It's a funny. For one thing, my wife was a big Stephen King fan. I used to buy her all the hardbacks. Yeah. I still have all of the hardbacks for 30 years worth of Stephen King novel. I was buying her those things when we were in junior high. That's how big of a fan she was of this. This was a particularly good adaptation of
Taylor Hackford at his artistic best because it's really kind of impressionistic. The way that he a lot of it is shot on sound stages for outdoors. It's
when that whole scene and so it's a very good adaptation of the Stephen King, very moody, some excellent performances. including Kathy Bates and Jennifer Jason Leigh, but also David Strathairn as her very scary ass husband.
Yeah.
And I forget the woman who played the woman that she worked for in that mansion.
Yeah.
A line of dialogue that sticks in my head. Sometimes, Dolores, all a woman has in the world is to be a bitch. You know what? Stuck with me for 25 years. I get that in the current zeitgeist of things. Go for it, baby.
And two others from the archive collection. Michael J. Fox in Doc Hollywood.
Another movie that I did the junket for some 25 years ago.
Michael Caton Jones, great director from the UK, who came over and did a very underrated film, to be honest. Michael J. Fox is really very, very good in this. It's I'm glad they kind of unearthed this and put it back in circulation. This is from 1991.
Young LL Cool J in that movie, if I recall. It was a neat little movie where he was playing a movie star. No, this is Doc Hollywood. This is one where he's the doctor that has to go. It has to go. I was making the mistake with the one where he plays the movie star.
No.
But those were those early movies in the 90s. Yeah.
This is post Back to the Future.
Oh, yeah.
So he's sort of trying to grow up as an actor, and it's interesting. And it's a fish out of water thing. Basically, he's a doctor. He's just gotten his medical degree and
gonna be a fancy plastic surgeon in Beverly Hills, but ends up stuck
South Carolina.
Yeah. Yeah,
and Julie Warner is just delightful in this, and Woody Harrelson is very, very good in the supporting performance.
Some nuts about her.
I know. Bridget Fonda's in this too. It's a nice little '90s throwback movie, and I'm glad they went and unearthed it. I really am. And then we also have Auntie Mame with Rosalind Russell from the archive collection. This is from 1958, and it's still a really, really, really fun film. The director, Morton DeCosca, not really a guy who had much of a film career, but kills it in this one. Really does a great job. Fantastic adaptation from the Broadway show, which Rosalind Russell also starred in, and it's just a lot of fun. 1958. Early widescreen era, lots of just glowing color. It's great, and you also get a music-only track with the score, which is fantastic, and the trailer and the trailer for Mame the musical.
John Wayne is Brannigan. And not only I remember, this is an underrated John Wayne movie, sort of middle to late John Wayne movie. Where he's playing a character contemporary to the time that the movie was made in, which is 1975. He's playing a Chicago cop. And there was, I think it was McHugh, didn't he play McHugh or something like McClintock or something? I don't know.
McClintock.
That's what it was. So he had a few of those late career movies where he got to wear actual, a suit and a tie and carry a gun and do kind of a Clint Eastwood-y.
He clearly saw Dirty Harry and thought, I don't like that Clint's getting all those parts. Right one for me. And
who wrote it? Christopher Trumbo is who wrote it. Who's Dalton Trumbo's son, of course. And in this movie, you get yourself Richard Attenborough doing some acting. He plays this Chicago cop who has to go to the UK to grab this mobster and escort him back to the United States. And, of course, all kinds of people don't want that to happen. You get Mel Ferrar. You get John Vernon. This is just a really, really strong... it might be a little... actually, you know what? This movie is actually still even pretty violent by today's standards.
It is.
As I think about it.
For sure.
So a neat movie on Blu-ray. Not a lot else on there, but your John Wayne is waiting for you.
So we are loaded up here with a lot of stuff from Kino. Kino over the break released a lot of stuff, and we're just gonna go through this because Kino there is enough classic movie stuff from Kino over the past few weeks to just occupy you for months. So we're gonna go through some of the best of it, and I'm gonna start off with a little bit more John Wayne. Legend of the Lost, which also stars Sophia Loren and Rossano Brazzi. This is from 1957. Henry Hathaway Western, perfectly wonderful. Basically, it's a Western in this sense. It's a Western that takes place in the Sahara, but it's still basically a Western. So, it's just wonderful. It's got big stars in it, and who cares what the plot is, really? You're watching John Wayne and Sophia Loren and Rossano Brazzi.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. But yeah, it's a lost treasure movie, basically, and it's a very, very nice Blu-ray transfer. Similarly enjoyable is a legit Western, which is Burt Lancaster in The Kentuckian from 1955. Walter Matthau was a shockingly young actor in this. This was his very, very first film. And he's amazing. He almost steals the movie from Burt Lancaster, to be honest. So you realize what a star Walter Matthau is about to be. John Carradine, Una Merkel, very, very fun film. Directed by Burt Lancaster, we should point out. So The Kentuckian, really, really terrific Western film from 1955. Captures, look, Lancaster meant for this to be a total vehicle for his own stardom. So it's a little bit vain, but it's still fun. It's still really, really fun.
Well,
what else we got? Yeah, let's hit those.
Let's jump on to... Let me do The Mercenary, which is a neat Franco Nero, Tony Mastante film. What I love about this film, directed by Sergio Corbucci. So Sergio Corbucci originated the Django films.
Yes.
He was the very first director of one of those films that went on. I don't know. There must be 60 or 70 Django films in the all the way through Quentin Tarantino's one, where Django became black. Which was fine, and you could do that in the Django film because Django was all kinds of. It was just
there's no rule.
Django, by the way, is a Romany word.
Oh, that's right.
It is a Romany phrase that means "I awake." It's not even a name; it's a phrase. It means "I awake" in Romany, which is neat. This also stars this movie, The Mercenary. Also stars Jack Palance and Tony Mastante. Tony Mastante was the star of an early '70s drama called, I think maybe. I want to say Tony Roma.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Sure.
It was like a little. It was sort of biting on Beretta a little bit. He would drive around it. So I don't know. That just popped into my head. Neat movie from Alberto Grimaldi and Sergio Corbucci on Blu-ray. Audio commentary from Alex Cox on that one. And you also have Ceasefire, which is which was in 3D, a film from 1953. Owen Crump wrote and directed this movie. This is a fairly hardcore sort of World War II action film that features some Korean action film. I'm sorry, that features some actual footage from the Korean War in this movie.
Wow.
Which I'm sure archival, this, that, or the other thing, but nevertheless, pretty intense stuff in black and white. This is newly restored, HD 3. Again, it was in 3D, early 3D. Ceasefire, an amazing film. A couple of different interesting special features on this, including an in-depth look at Ceasefire, an essay by Ted Okuda.
And really interesting Alex Cox commentary on the spaghetti western classic Death Rides a Horse, which was directed by Giulio Petroni. Alex Cox has, for reasons that you understand when you listen to the commentary, is sort of invested in this in many respects. And this is one of the better spaghetti westerns that a lot of people have sort of forgotten. Lee Van Cleef, John Philip Law. It's a really very interesting film with a great Ennio Morricone score, and it's Ennio Morricone score that is not at all like what he did for the Fistful of Dollars and Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
The sort of austere thing. No, this is big and
this
lush.
Is different. It's different. It's not like his. It's just different, and great cast. It's really a very sharp film, made in 1967, kind of on the tail end of the spaghetti western thing, but right when it was sort of hitting a certain crescendo. It's really good. And you also get Luigi Pistilli, who was in for a few dollars more in there as well, so it's good. And then we also have Four Faces West, as long as we're on the subject of westerns. This is going back a little bit to 1949. Classic Hollywood Western from the 1940s. Black and white, beautifully shot. Nice transfer here. Great cast. Joel McRae anchoring it, and Francis D. and Charles Bickford carrying kind of picking up the rear. William Conrad is also in this, which I thought was interesting because I'm just used to William Conrad being a fat guy on TV.
Ironside and all that.
Or not Ironside.
Who's a Cannon?
Cannon.
Mixed him up with
Well, one was in a wheelchair, the other should have been in a wheelchair. That's the difference.
Anyway. That's brutal.
And then very last here on this little western run, Burt Lancaster again in a movie I'm lukewarm on. Valdez is coming. This is from 1971 when westerns were starting to get a little bit. They were looking for their footing, and they were all kind of trying to take their lead from Peckinpah films. They tended to get a little bit sadistic. There's some of that in this. It's takes Burt Lancaster plays a guy who's part Mexican, part American, and it's a little bit too revengey. It's kind of Death Wish in the West in some respect. There's an interesting audio commentary by a film historian named Jim Hemphill, which is very good and helps you gain kind of an appreciation for it. Otherwise, Valdez is coming. Late period Western that I'm lukewarm on.
Yeah, me too. Same kind of thing. A little bit like that Brandel film. Brandel directed. I can't remember the name of it, but it was a sort of Western thing with it. It was interesting. Carl Malden in that too. Yeah. Joseph Cotten, Ginger Rogers, and Shirley Temple in I'll Be Seeing You, which is a really interesting movie in the context of what the theme is. So Joseph Cotten plays this soldier coming back from the war, and he meets this woman on the train, played by Ginger Rogers, who is on furlough from prison for a murder, for a manslaughter. It's absolutely fascinating right there. You don't see many storylines that interesting alone. Today, it's kind of Selznick picture. Audio commentary also by historian Kat Ellinger and Sam Dehan in the original trailer there. Since You Went Away, also a film from 1944. It's a perfectly lovely film. Claudette Colbert, Jennifer Jones, also Joseph Cotten, and Shirley Temple in this film about a woman whose husband is away in the war, and she has two daughters played by Jennifer Jones and Shirley Temple, and how she's dealing and coping with all of that as her family is also taking on these boarders who are living there, and including Joseph. Just, again, a lovely, lovely film that you don't think of much. And we don't think of Shirley Temple and Jennifer Jones, who were both breathtakingly beautiful, by the way, at this particular time. Sure. Claudette Colbert as well in these films. Very, interesting movies that were made at that sort of more or less during the war and post-war period. Very good stuff.
Interesting movie, just film history-wise, from 1939, a year when everything was released. I mean, it was Gunga Din and Gone with the Wind, and Wizard of Oz, and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Everything happened in 1939. It was amazing. One that gets lost in the shuffle sometimes is Intermezzo with Ingrid Bergman and Leslie Howard. Originally a Swedish film starring Ingrid Bergman, and just 3 years earlier, and they did a big Hollywood remake and brought her over to reprise her part. And it still works because Leslie Howard is great and Ingrid Bergman is amazing. And it's basically about a violinist who develops who is magnetized by his daughter's piano teacher, and it becomes a romance, and a devastating romance in many respects. What's interesting about Intermezzo is that it's a film that is really very much a European film. Even in the 1930s, you can tell this is a story the Europeans were unafraid to wrestle with. Mm-hmm. This would never have been greenlit in Hollywood if it hadn't already been a successful European film. So it's a little edgier than you would normally expect for a Hollywood movie of that era, and for that reason alone, it is worthwhile. Also, this is just a lovely film, The Young and Heart, made in 1938, a Selznick film that is really just quintessentially Selznick on so many levels. If you've seen Rebecca or if you've seen Gone with the Wind, you know sort of how relationships and how family and how fate all factor into Selznick films. They're all things that he himself sort of was taken by, and they find, no matter who's writing them, no matter who's directing them, they always sort of find their way in. This is there's a bit of a scam here about trying to forge a will, and it's quite clever. It's very well written, based on a novel by I.A.R. Wiley, adapted by Charles Bennett and Paul Osborne, and just beautifully put together. Janet Gaynor, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Paulette Goddard, wonderful.
Yeah.
And then another film that I'm actually very, very fond of is The Garden of Allah, from 1936. This is just barely on the beginning of the production code. So there are things that likely make their way into this that would not have had it been made a few years later, even though this is technically under the code. Yeah. This is also a Selznick film, and it stars Marlene Dietrich and Charles Boyer, two European imports who bring an awful lot of really, really interesting sensibilities with them. It feels almost European in many respects. this forbidden romance thing against the backdrop of the Sahara Desert, with this amazing music, is just really, really great. Richard Boleslavsky directed this, and that is significant because Boleslavsky is considered one of the great theorists and teachers of acting. Stanislavski was basically learned from Boleslavsky. So Boleslavsky got to make a movie, and it's very much a European film made in Hollywood in the mid-30s, just barely on the cusp of the production code. It's really, really sharp, well worth watching.
Wonderful lineage there.
Yeah.
China Moon, 1991 film. I'm dropping again. I did the junket for China Moon in 1991. First time I met Madeline Stowe. So beautiful. I actually think I blacked out for a moment. When I met Madeline Stowe, 1990. Ed Harris, Madeline Stowe. Ed Harris plays this cop, and Madeline Stowe is this woman who's married to this guy who's abusive, and there's a killing, and Ed Harris, because he is smitten by the breathtakingly beautiful Madeline Stowe, agrees to help her hide the body. But he has this partner who's looking around. Look, this was the first time I also really got a sense of Benicio del Toro, who shows up in this movie. Very young Benicio, well before The Usual Suspects, I think. And Pruitt Vincent Taylor. So this is one of those movies, you know, from back in the day that harkened well.
You see people who are all going to be popping up with regularity.
Because I saw him and I noticed him. I'm like, whoa, that guy can go. John Bailey film. This is neat movie.
John Bailey, my gosh, whatever happened to John Bailey?
Audio commentary on this, which is great. Big Business, which is Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin, and Scenes from a Mall, which is Bette Midler and Woody Allen. And
a rare acting bit for another director.
Particularly by this period, because Woody, he popped into a few more movies before he's finished up with that. But interesting, he was working for Paul Mazursky. In Scenes from the Mall. Neat movie. The Big Business, I only barely remember that movie. I remember that it was about these twins that were born, and two sets of twins, and one set of twins got sent off to a rich family, and the others got sent off to the poor family. It was one of those switchy kind of things. That was a lot of fun. Scenes from a Mall, I don't remember a lot, but I do remember that most of it takes place in the Beverly Center Mall over on La Cienega.
It does. Yeah, they shot it all over there.
Which has been revamped.
Woody Allen with his surfboard,
with the white suit. It's sort of neat there. So two features there. Both one from 1988, the other one from 1991.
And we have three Stanley Kramer movies, which is either going to be a blessing or a curse, depending on how you view Stanley Kramer.
I like Stanley.
Stanley Kramer was I still remember what Tarantino said about Oliver Stone after he made Natural Born Killers. He was so disapproved. He said he's like, what is he? He's like Stanley Kramer with style. His obviousness. Anyway, there's some real insult, and he meant it as an epithet that he was comparing him to Stanley Kramer. But Stanley Kramer was a guy who had a deep social conscience, and it inflected into all of his work, and it was his choices, and right up to something like Exodus, which is
Home of the Brave, and it's all. His intention is what you need to be paying attention to in Stanley Kramer production, because he produced more movies than he directed.
So the first one is the least Stanley Kramery of all of these, Not as a Stranger from 1955, which is kind of a programmer. Has a really interesting commentary by film historian Troy Howarth, which kind of sets the background for you. Robert Mitchum is, a just ruthless medical student who wants to be a doctor. But he's not just a doctor. He's almost megalomaniacally idealistic, and it takes him on this trajectory to where he has to how do I do this without giving it away? He winds up not living up to his own expectations. Let's just say that he doesn't live up to his own expectations. And what is that crisis of conscience? And did he expect too much of himself? And how does it affect people around him, etc.? I mean, it's a wonderful golden era movie that has all kinds of great supporting performances in it. Olivia de Havilland, Frank Sinatra, Gloria Graham, Broderick Crawford. Lon Chaney, for crying out loud. Harry Morgan, Lee Marvin. It's ridiculous who shows up in this movie, all because Stanley Kramer could just get people into his movies. If Stanley Kramer called and said, I want you in my movie, you were in the movie.
Stature. That's called Stature.
Stature. And then 5 years later, in 1960, he made the classic, the wonderful Inherit the Wind, which is all about the monkey trial. And Spencer Tracy, Frederick March, Gene Kelly are all amazing in this. Absolutely amazing. Harry Morgan shows up again. He's regular in just about everything at that time. Norman Fell, eventually of Three's Company, is in this, who would show up end of the decade in a very memorable moment in The Graduate. I want you out of here. Strange line reading in The Graduate. I just watched that the other day. I don't know what he's doing. He's like snorting. He's like coughing up something. He's like, I want you out of here. It's the weirdest thing. Anyway, it's a terrific movie. Really, really good. It's been done a number of times since. Never as well. Audio commentary, again, by Jim Hemphill. And then the last of the three is arguably one of the best Stanley Kramer films ever made, Judgment at Nuremberg. This is a fantastic movie. Maximilian Schell, Spencer Tracy, Burt Lancaster, Richard Widmark, Judy Garland, Montgomery Clift, Marlena Dietrich, one of the most amazing all-star casts of all time. This won 2 Academy Awards. It was nominated for 11, and it is a truly, truly legendary film. It is still one of the best of all time. William Shatner's even in this, in a small part, from 1961. And, of course, by the end of the decade, William Shatner would be more famous than all these people. It's the weirdest thing in the world. How fates can turn on a dime. But anyway, that has a bunch of extras on it. Tribute to Kramer featurette, another featurette, a trailer, and then a conversation with Abby Mann, the screenwriter, and Maximilian Schell.
I have For Love of Ivy here, 1968 film from Daniel Mann, starring Sidney Poitier and Abby Lincoln and Beau Bridges and a few others. This is we were just talking about Stanley Kramer just a second ago. And the thing about this film is it lives in that sort of same zone. Not many people remember this movie, but I always rather liked it. Again, as a matter of intention, as we see this sort of these sort of black folks and white folks interacting in this very particular way, which has at the center of it a very positive intention. So you have Abby Lincoln, who's a maid for this white family. She tells her white family, "I'm going to go back to school." Beau Bridges, who has a crush on her and really just doesn't want her to leave, decides that he's going to set her up with a guy, hopefully to dissuade her from leaving and going back to school. Sets her up with Sidney Poitier. Thinking that Sidney, who is sort of suave and sexy and smart, will come in and turn her head a little bit, but won't really be interested in marrying her, and that she'll decide to stay, except that Sidney Poitier has a set of different ideas about what it is they are going to do. It's really a sort of interesting film. Again, 1968. We're into this material. Daniel Mann, who directed Come Back Little Sheba.
A lot of great movies.
Butterfield 8.
Yeah.
Willard. I mean, this is really, really great stuff. And again, he's just one of those guys who we sort of have forgotten about over the years. Young Sidney Poitier and Abby Lincoln. Abby Lincoln, who was also an extraordinary jazz singer. And was in Ivan Dixon's wonderful movie Nothing But a Man.
That's right.
That's Abby Lincoln. Yeah,
that is the same. You know what? That didn't even dawn on me.
Yep. Extraordinary stuff.
A few others here from Kino Lorber. We got Alan Dwan, who was a good B-movie programmer back there. Alan Dwan made a movie called Driftwood with a wonderful young Natalie Wood, a post-Miracle on 34th Street Natalie Wood in 1947. You know what? This is just basically about an orphan and her wonderful coming of age. Natalie Wood is just absolutely delightful in this. You can tell that she's just a huge star in the making, and it's just going to get better and better and better for her. It's pretty workmanlike. Most Alan Dwan movies were at the time. There's nothing particularly spectacular about them. But look, Walter Brennan and Dean Jagger support her beautifully. Margaret Hamilton back in there from Wizard of Oz. It's a very, very sweet film made for Republic Pictures before they went under, and it's called Driftwood, and you see it for Natalie Wood.
Yeah.
And then The Whales of August by Lindsay Anderson. Lindsay Anderson, who was one of the seminal figures, with movies like If, of the British New Wave, the kitchen sink realism group. Lindsay Anderson kind of tamped it down later in his career for 1987's reunion between Bette Davis and Lillian Gish with Vincent Price and Ann Sothern. This is just a lot of old people in front of the camera and behind the camera celebrating age. That's
Yeah.
all it is. It's a celebration of age, and don't throw us out. We're worth something, and it's really quite a beautiful movie. The older you get, the more you appreciate it. To be honest, it's really quite touching. So from 1987, The Whales of August by Lindsay Anderson, with tons and tons of audio commentary material and extras. There's an audio commentary here with the producer Mike Kaplan, moderated by our good friend and LAFCA colleague Stephen Farber, which was a nice thing to discover. And then there are just vintage interviews and all kinds of fun stuff, but mostly interviews and featurettes. And there's even a bit with Malcolm McDowell reflecting on Lindsay Anderson. It's really, really good. And then Blame It on Rio, a movie that I have a certain fondness for.
Me too. Bologna.
Joe Bologna. Also, it was written by Charlie Peters and Larry Gelbart. Charlie Peters happens to be a very good friend of mine.
Yep. Larry Gelbart, of course.
Tootsie. MASH and Tootsie. Yeah. So I've never had the courage to ask Charlie what the process was, who wrote the first draft, who rewrote whom. I know they were never in the room together.
Yeah.
So I'm tempted to think that Charlie wrote the first draft and Larry rewrote him, but whatever, it's still a really terrific movie. And, one of Stanley Donen's last films. And one of his last films, it sort of feels like a Stanley Donen movie in many respects. It's a little weird to watch this, with all its sexual content and older man and younger woman stuff, Michael Caine, and it's a little under the current situation. It feels a little.
Demi Moore, of course, and Christy. Was it Christy Swanson? Who's that?
No,
the blonde.
it's what was her name? Michelle Johnson.
Michelle Johnson. Yeah, and then these two fathers, and they have these daughters, and one father and the other daughter.
In the current environment, it feels a little pushing the envelope, but it's still a really good movie.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. Look, the zeitgeist of the day is relevant, right?
Yeah.
I know very well that movie was considered extremely sophisticated on the day. Kind of like whenever we talk about Woody Allen. Manhattan, 1979, and all the stuff going on in that movie. A lot of again in the conversations of the current day.
True.
We are poking at these movies, but again, I remember in 1979, I graduated from high school in 1979. Went to see that movie, and it was considered extremely sophisticated.
It was.
That's what we were thinking about at the day. Speaking of Woody Allen, I have Twilight Time release of Woody Allen's 1990 film Alice.
Which is Woody in dramatic mode.
Yeah, and dramatic magical realism mode.
Yeah.
Which he would do every now and again. Alice. You got Mia Farrow still. You have Alec Baldwin, and you have Alice, who's playing his wife. He's some sort of high-powered executive or lawyer or whatever the hell he is, and she's this sort of Upper East Side man, the sort of character that Woody writes, and we follow her as she sort of wanders through the journey of her life as she figures out what it is that she should be doing with her life of, relatively speaking, privilege.
Yep.
And we have some really neat sequences when she smokes the opium and all that kind of neat stuff. Anyway, a neat film, special features, isolated music tracks is the only thing here. Woody doesn't put a whole lot of special stuff in his movies. He lets them stand on their own.
Also from Twilight Time is the little seen 1970 adaptation of Wuthering Heights, Emily Bronte's only novel. And when you've written Wuthering Heights, you really don't need to write anything else. It's kind of you killed it right there. This is not as famous, obviously, as the William Wyler film with Laurence Olivier, the old 1930. I guess that was 39 as well. Wuthering Heights, and obviously not as famous as that one, but that is also not the complete story. So this is in many respects, this is a more faithful version. Interesting that Timothy Dalton, the young Timothy Dalton, playing the part of Heathcliff here, really quite an interesting take on it. Anna Calder Marshall plays Kathy. It is it's not as sweepingly romantic. It's not as swooning, but it has. I don't know. It feels in many respects more faithful. So I think this is definitely worth checking out, especially if you're a kind of a Bronte completist. Noteworthy that it was produced by Sam Arkoff and James Nicholson of AIP. This was one of their occasional attempts to go legit and to do something that was more highbrow and not an exploitation film, and it really works. And of course, directed by Robert Fuest, who is very, very talented, with a wonderful score by Michel Legrand, just a beautiful, beautiful, lush score. Extras include a commentary track with film historian Justin Humphreys and isolated music, as per usual, on all Twilight Time stuff.
Interesting. One of my... this is a movie that I actually remember watching as a very, very, very young person, mostly because in it is Diana Rigg. Diana Rigg from, of course, the Avengers series.
You sold me.
So, I was done. So, I'm like 10 years old when The Hospital comes out, which was which was one in a series of movies from that period that included Airport and eventually Airport 77 and The Towering Inferno. Movies about urban or other sort of circumstances where everything was simply falling apart. And this was about an urban hospital in a big city that was completely out of control, and you have this doctor. It's Petty Chayefsky.
Yeah.
It's network only at a hospital is what it is. Arthur Hiller directing. And it's just it's just a really, really powerful film that's probably tweaked somewhat dramatically by today's standards. But I think that films like this led to things like that series ER. I mean, Michael Crichton would have been a young man in medical school when this film would have come out, and I think that films like or television series like ER are sort of come out of stuff like this Petty Chayefsky, this Arthur Hiller. It's really, really good stuff. So check it out. Not a whole lot on here. Special features include, again, an isolated musical track in the original trailer. I was going to jump to the L-shaped room real quick.
Go for it.
Which is, again, a very interesting film considering the time in which it was made. This is a 1962 film about a young woman, Leslie Caron, who is pregnant, and she goes to live in this. She's a little French woman. She goes to live in this London sort of boarding house with a whole bunch of misfits and weird people, as she considers whether or not she is going to have an abortion. Again, this is 1962. This is pretty wild. This is pointed stuff that we're having. Yeah. You have all of these people who live in this house, including a young Brock Peters. Anthony Booth plays a young guy that she sort of falls in love with on the floor, and it's all about how she comes to love her L-shaped room and what she decides to do. It's based on a novel from the same period. And I will pop over to another. We'll go back a bit to 1947 Otto Preminger film, Forever Amber.
Beautiful movie.
Linda Darnell, Cornel Wilde, Richard Green. Just this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful movie about a climber, basically. It's about a young woman who is born to a certain circumstance who wants to make it up to another circumstance and what she has to give up to get there, including what would likely have been the love of her life. Good stuff.
From Arrow, we got some interesting stuff here. We got the Arrow Video and Arrow Academy. Arrow Video, of course, is the more popular pop culture stuff, and Arrow Academy is the artsier, Criterion-y stuff. From the regular Arrow line is Michael Caine in Pulp, which was his... he reunited with his... Get Carter director Mike Hodges, who of course would go on to do Flash Gordon and other fun, wacky movies. This is actually a really strange film from 1972, where Michael Caine plays a novelist who has written these really very risque titles. Like My Gun Is Long and The Organ Grinder, right? They're not being very subtle here. Anyway, he is asked to be a ghostwriter on an autobiography of an actor with very shady connections, played by Mickey Rooney. In a weird performance. Mickey Rooney's a very unusual casting for this. And where that doesn't, of course, go where you expect it to go. It goes in all kinds of weird directions. I don't know how much I like this. It was written by Mike Hodges as well. And Mike Hodges just has a really strange sensibilities as a writer and a director, and sometimes it works. I love Flash Gordon. He didn't write. I love Get Carter. He didn't write Flash Gordon. Lorenzo Semple Jr. wrote Flash Gordon. But anyway, lots of extras on here, especially a new interview with Mike Hodges, which hopefully will illuminate it for somebody. It didn't really for me. There's also an interview with the cinematographer. Usama Rawi, which is quite good. It's I guess I can recommend it as a rental. We also have Best Picture winner for 1961, The Apartment, which is just an absolutely fantastic movie. The Apartment is, some might call it the best all-time, actually 1960.
1960.
1960, Best Picture of 1960.
Yeah.
Some would call it the best Billy Wilder film of all time. It's pretty close. It's a great film. It's
Diamond. Again, extremely sophisticated material. When you look at we look at it from today's standpoint of view, and it's like, but this is about a young woman.
Yeah.
And it's about an apartment in Jack Lemmon, whose apartment it is, and these affairs had by these executives. So now again, when we speak of this today, in today's zeitgeist,
it is Fred McMurray playing basically the Harvey Weinstein of the movie.
Yeah.
It's pushing a lot of buttons there on the cusp of the 1960s. So this is an unbelievably beautiful disc. I think Criterion will be just kicking themselves that they weren't able to make this deal. 4K restoration from the original camera negative by Arrow Films specifically for this release, with amazing audio remix, lossless DTS. I mean, this is as good as you will ever see The Apartment. I saw it in school in a nitrate print, and I got to tell you, you watch this thing in HD, it's as close as it gets. It's just absolutely beautiful. Video essays, featurettes, all kinds of stuff on here. Film historian named Bruce Block does an audio commentary. It's absolutely wonderful. The whole everything about this is just terrific, and you even get a 150-page book with including new writing by Neil Sinyard, Kat Ellinger, Travis Crawford, and Heather Hitch. Not sure how to pronounce it. With all kinds of illustrations from the movie. It's great, absolutely great. So I can't recommend this highly enough. This is one of the best sets ever for a Best Picture winner.
Yeah. 1 year, about a year or so after Something Like It Hot, I guess.
Yeah,
something like that.
And the last two here are both kind of time travel-y themed things. One of them is a classic. The other one is not.
Well, I don't know.
Well, okay.
In a way.
So we have the long-awaited, because it was delayed once, the 4K release, the 4K Blu-ray release of Terminator 2 Judgment Day. It's kind of, it's got a lot of stuff on it. It's beautiful. It's 4K, and it's got, extras and whatnot, deleted scenes, and the T2 30-minute making of featurette and all that stuff. What it also has is 3 different versions of the film, which I'm grateful for, because that got really old really quickly. I don't know if you remember, but they come out with one version, then 6 months later another version, and at a certain point there were all these different versions of T2 floating around, and it was impossible to and I was collecting. One had a tin, and the other one came in the thing, and I was so annoyed by that.
I've got some 3 or 4 of them myself. It's ridiculous.
Here we go. They're all on here.
They're all on there.
So just get yourself your 4K Ultra HD set, and you're done with it. You don't have to worry about that crap ever again. I don't recommend anybody watch this thing in 3D, which this doesn't have.
There was no reason to do that back in 1990, whenever.
No, that was all after the fact.
That was all bad. You got to mention Yor. You have to.
Yor, the Hunter from the Future.
Reb.
35th anniversary. Reb Brown, who was in an absolutely terrible movie that I had to review on Film Week last week.
Oh, that nutty Surge of Power thing.
Surge of Power, yeah, where he's making he's like making Captain America jokes. And I wanted to scream. I'm like, nobody remembers him playing Captain America. They do remember him playing Yor. So I was a theater usher at the theater that opened Yor in Westwood, California, which no longer exists. The theater, not Westwood.
Yeah.
And I remember the Italian producers of this who thought they had themselves an Academy Award winner or something. I remember them showing up and speaking Italian in the lobby, and they were so excited for their Yor Hunter from the Future movie. And I had seen the thing at a sound check like a couple of days before, and I remember they were sitting there thinking they had a great movie on their hands, and I wanted to cry. I wanted to cry for them. Yor is a ridiculously campy, silly movie. It's like he's a caveman, and then there's some futuristic society, a bunch of look. All you need to know is at one point Yor actually hang glides using the body of a dead pterodactyl.
Yes,
I can't. And the music. Oh my gosh, it's the silliest.
There was a run of these films, the Beastmaster films, and the Crawl, and all. There was a run. I don't know what it was. Early '80s.
This thing is such a camp classic. It's so ridiculous on so many levels. I don't even know where to go. The horrible wig that Reb Brown is wearing. Anyway.
Reb, by the way, who, if you're paying attention to the Captain American film Winter Soldier,
yes.
Reb, watch for the scene with Stan Lee.
Yeah.
The guy standing next to Stan.
Yeah.
Reb Brown.
I didn't know that.
That's Reb.
Well, there's a little. You learn something on this podcast every time.
I should really get something to do.
Anyway, all right. So Red Brown does the commentary on this, by the way, folks. And I got to tell you, the only reason to get this is not for the movie. It's for Reb's commentary because you're going to love it. Yeah. Anyway, all right, that's it. We're done this week. We will see you next week with the big wrap for the LA Film Critics Awards, and we will hear what wonderful things transpired from Tim. You won't hear it from me. I won't be there, but Tim will give you the lowdown.
Should be quite an afternoon, quite an evening.